I'm Wim from the Netherlands.
Okay.
I'm geographer. And I learned from the IPCC that the main molecule causing the greenhouse effect is water vapor.
Yeah.
Causing clouds.
Actually, clouds themselves are the next most important, or maybe just as important, because thin clouds at high altitude mainly absorb infrared.
So together, the IPCC says they are responsible for 75% of the greenhouse effect, clouds and water vapor together. And then my question is, why are we always talking about carbon dioxide when the H2O molecule is that important?
Well, two reasons, one good, one bad. The good reason is we can't do anything about water vapor. Okay. The bad reason is the political system isn't interested in water vapor. They're interested in the energy economy, and from the point of view of the malicious party, there is no burning of fossil fuel that doesn't produce CO2. So you're not attacking coal or oil or natural gas, all of them. And so that's its virtue from a political point of view. No, I mean, water vapor and ice are natural. Saying that 70% is a little bit tricky. They may be more than that because these things don't linearly add up. So you might do almost everything with water vapor, but if you had a bit of CO2, it would share some of it. No, but demonizing CO2, certainly the main reason you demonized it is it was the inevitable, no matter how clean you burn coal or oil or gas, the two things left over will be CO2 and water.
Two greenhouse gases.
Yeah.
Can I ask a follow-up question on this one?
Yeah.
What you were replying to the question is that CO2 and consequentially also methane are proxies. Proxies for energy production and proxies for meat consumption.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. In other words, if your aim is the energy economy, and there's a reason for aiming for the energy economy, obviously. I mean, there are very few things. I mean, for instance, let's say banning Freon for the ozone issue. You know, it's not a big deal. It's a few $1 billion. If you want to spend big time, the energy economy, you can throw trillions of dollars at. And that plays a big role in the influence. I mean, as I often point out, if you're giving out, as our president in the US currently wants to give out $9 trillion for climate-related expenses, somebody's going to get them. And they're going to be very happy to get that. Even if what they're doing is harmful or useless. And if they need political support, if you get $9 trillion and you give 3% back, you can influence every member of our Congress and Senate for a long time to come. And so they'll support it. So it's a kind of vicious circle when you're talking about that scale.
When you read the book of Leroy-Ladurie about the climate, it is a book of the dating of 67, before the IPCC.
Right.
It is very affirmative and has proofs for the existence of the Little Ice Age.
Of course.
And the Little Ice Age finished in 1850. So, and if it is not CO2, and since 1850, our Earth has been we are really warming up 1 degree or 1.5 degree. The figure is not very important. But if it is not CO2, what is it? Can you tell us? Because one word has not yet been said today, it is the word sun.
The problem is climate on the Earth is heavily regional. It is also the case that climate, which we arbitrarily define as a 30-year average, it depends on many things and will occur whether there's any external forcing or not. The climate in any given region will change with time due to its proximity to the ocean, whether the ocean is to the east or the west, how the land use has varied. All these things change climate, and the climate change is largely regional. So we spoke about the medieval warm period, where Europe and Greenland were obviously warmer. And then the hockey stick comes and says, they didn't change the mean. Well, who cares? If the hockey stick were right, it's saying Europe got warmer for 300 years, someplace else must have gotten colder for 300 years, and we're going to say that's not climate. But of course it is. So one has to stop thinking in terms of one cause, one response, one temperature, and saying that represents the Earth. It's easy to speak that way, but that isn't the way nature works.
With all the knowledge that you expose now and share with us, I am even more confused with all the parameters that you are including. It seems like we know less about how we can influence climate or how we can do anything about it, rather than politics who tell us that CO2 is enough to control climate. Is it true to conclude that actually we know a lot and actually we know nothing?
There is a big space between those two limits. And yeah, I think there's a lot we don't know. Part of the reason is fluid mechanics. I don't know. I mean, if there are engineers here, I mean,
yes.
You know, turbulence is not a trivial problem, and the atmosphere is turbulent. We do not have models that actually model the clouds. They're parameterized. You assume they do certain things. So it's a difficult problem. And to treat it as a trivial problem, you just crank CO2 up and down and it goes up and down every place, is sheer nonsense. And, you know, you're talking about, you know, all scientists agree and this sort of nonsense. Yeah, I know in my department, I mean, you know, everyone looks for a way to say, well, I agree, there may be some warming, and as long as the politicians are willing to accept that support for them, they continue. But if you look at these statements that you find in the official documents, the scientists are always covering themselves by saying something that is almost meaningless, but doesn't sound like they're disagreeing. It's a phenomenally unhealthy situation.
The system is so complex that it's surprising that we are saying that we know everything. And you have worked for all your life on that, and we realize how complicated it is. It's why I think that politicians should be a little bit more modest. To say that we know everything and everybody agree on this and that we need to change the society.
Saying that most scientists are too polite to each other and are afraid of creating some polarization among them?
I'm not saying that exactly. You're in a situation now where you're dependent on the state for your funding. You have this issue, which is polarizing in some ways, but the question is, what can you say that preserves, should I say, your integrity, your virginity, or whatever, and still not offend the system and get in trouble? And you find that throughout the literature, including the IPCC. They'll say as little as possible to stay within the confines of supportive statement without going as far as the politician. And I have some examples I'll speak about tomorrow, but you know, where the scientists kind of let the politician say that the scientists support the politician, but the scientists, when you read what they've said, are really limiting what they're supporting. And I think there's an assumption, and I think it's important for people who want to find out what's going on to actually read the stuff. And yeah, I mean, I've said that before. I mean, you know, how shall I put it? For the ordinary citizen, I don't know. You have other things to do. But for the people in the energy industry, for not taking the time to read and do their homework, I find really appalling.
You have been member of IPCC.
Yeah.
Can you explain us how IPCC is working? Because not everybody is aware of the big work that there is behind IPCC.
First of all, it's a UN operation, which means that it looks for global participation. Normally, that's nice, but in scientific areas, very few countries in the world today are centers of scientific work. I mean, it'll be the Western world, mostly in China now, Japan. So there's that issue, but on the whole, it's an operation which has parts that are not terrible and parts that are absurd. So the not terrible part, they'll have hundreds of scientists getting together to write the Working Group 1 report on science. And most of the people are somewhat related to science, and they're chosen by the British Met Office. Not chosen, they're nominated by the countries who belong to the UN, and they're vetted by the British Met Office. And on the whole, I would say they're not making much distinction between who says what. So at that stage, at least until the first 4 or 5 assessments, that was okay. And so each chapter of the science, each covering the oceans, the atmosphere, clouds, this, that, the other thing, attribution, has about 14, 15 people who are chosen by the scientific, quote, process. And then those people are called lead authors. There are also contributing lead authors who do not attend the meetings but contribute stuff. Finally, there is the coordinating lead author. He is not chosen by the scientific branch. He's chosen by the IPCC executive. He's also a scientist, but he, quote, a more reliable scientist. At any rate, so you have these groups meet, and you really are told, do not be too critical of models. But beyond that, they're not necessarily pushing. There'll be a guy who is the monitor who goes around saying, you've gone too far, you've gone to this. But there is a certain amount of leeway in that. I was in a group of 3. We were doing the section on clouds and water vapor. And the 2 colleagues were people I knew well, who are pretty much going along with the CO2 thing. But we agreed we would not say anything that we knew to be wrong. And the section is okay. So you have this report, it's written by people, they're trying to be not dishonest, but maybe not completely honest. And then you have the summary for policymakers, because the resulting report is about 1,000 pages. The summary is written with the coordinating lead authors plus government officials. It's an interesting document in that it comes out 6 months before the report. So it doesn't come out after, it comes out before. And if there is, and here it gets touchy. So you have this 30-page report, the summary, comes out before. And they've realized after the first 2 reports, there are now 6, I think, that nobody reads 30 pages. Forget 1,000 pages. So they have what's called the iconic statement. Now, for instance, with Michael Mann, it was, we now, that it's unprecedented. Another that we believe that most of the warming of the last 60 years is due to man, or one thing like that. There'll be an iconic statement, and only the chapter that has something relevant to the iconic statement will be altered. The rest will get through. There was an op-ed piece by a man called Frederick Seitz, a very important figure in science. He's regarded by some as the father of solid-state electronics, solid-state physics. He was president of the National Academy, president of Rockefeller University. He had an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal saying the modification of the attribution section was the worst thing he had ever seen done by a scientific group. This is a funny thing. On the other hand, most of the document, probably 950 pages of it, is pretty what I would call anodyne. It's not wrong, it's not complete. Then you have other reports they come out with that have no relation to the science, and they use the fact that there's a scientific report to make the public think that they're all scientific reports. That's the trickier part of it.
Is there any factor or any demonstration which could be done to demonstrate finally that there is nothing to worry? Like a little bit Galileo Galilei has Jupiter and his satellite to show, yes, finally it turns.
Unfortunately, climate has thousands of degrees of freedom, which a simple mechanical system does not have. But on the other hand, I would ask the obvious question, how often do their predictions have to fail before you begin to wonder whether they're right or not?
A last question.
Yeah.
Scientist, geochronologist, but these last 6 years I'm teaching because I didn't have any scholarship anymore in the National Science Foundation. So I would like you to explain to me why is the American society more critical minded towards this climate change issue, and why is our European society apparently more indoctrinated and doesn't formulate any argument against it?
Okay, let me ask a question back. How sure are you of that? In other words, how mixed is European society? Because what I find is, I would assume everyone here has gone to college.
Yes.
Is that typical of your society?
No.
Is what you're saying true of ordinary people who didn't go to college? If you ask them privately in the bar, do you really believe this stuff? I bet you'd get a lot of them saying then, no, this sounds crazy to me. And then we get into what I call the good student problem. You get told a half degree is going to cause the world to boil, and you're reluctant to say, this is stupid.
In the States and here, the media, and I don't know in the States, but here in Belgium, our courses,
I know that.
The French side,
Yeah.
they are indoctrinating our kids, starting from the first year high school.
We have the same. We have the same.
So you have the same.
But it turns out, for instance, in the polling in the US, that the younger people, teenagers now who went through it, are becoming more skeptical. That people in rural areas never accepted it. Whenever you poll the American public, it's still close to over half, a little over half, don't buy it. Now, the question I have for here is how carefully have you asked the questions? In other words, we each live in our own bubble. So if you have a college education, the odds are most of the people you know are in the same boat. You don't know too many carpenters, you don't know too many, this, that, and the other, machinists. Do you know how they're thinking? It's a democracy. They have a vote too.
I can see a big difference. I'm nearly retired. I'm dealing with young teachers. Young teachers, freshly graduated.
Yeah.
And it's very hard for them to accept my critical mind about this climatic issue. And I'm a geologist, so I know our Earth constantly has changed.
Yes.
It's very natural. But I notice in our education, what is written in the books is decided by politicians,
yes,
by the scientists.
Yeah. I mean, America has an example of that I love. During Franklin Roosevelt's administration, you had a problem. You had the Northern Democrats and the Southern Democrats. And in order to win elections, you had to keep them together. But the North was, I would say, more left-wing. The South was still having segregation and racism. And so deals were made, and one of the deals made was that the state of Texas would choose the school books for New York. And so when I went to school, my school books were chosen by the state of Texas. And we continued to learn about eugenics until the 50s, 60s.
Ladies and gentlemen, I think that we had a very interesting and long session, and I think that we leave the room with the conviction that it's much more complicated than what we are saying, and there is no reason to change the way of life of the people in the world for something which is so uncertain.
No, I disagree. I think we're pretty certain that nothing dramatic will happen.
So it's worth more than what I was saying.